What I'm going to talk to you tonight about is a little broader than what the title suggests, right? So originally when I've given this talk and on this topic, I had a title something like Picking Winners and Losers, the Role of State in Economic Development. And I sent that to Dan, and he's like, and I sent him a few quotes, and he's like, yeah, what if we call it the wisdom of politicians instead, right? So if I wanted to make it more academic, I would put a colon in this, and I would say wisdom of politicians, right? Picking winners and losers. But I might have Dan, I might just now start outsourcing all my titles to talks, right? To make this a little sexier and a little more fun. But what this did make me think about as soon as I did this was one of my favorite Hayek quotes. And how many of you, I'm curious, ever listened to the podcast Econ Talk? Anybody ever listen to that? If you are, then you've heard Russ Roberts refer to this quote a million times, right? The curious task of economics is to demonstrate to men how little they really know about what they imagine they can design. Now, this doesn't mean we shouldn't be imaginative, right? This doesn't mean we shouldn't try to be creative, right? But it does mean that we need to understand systems are complex. And can we really design them? Do we, we have this sort of hubris that we can design something and it's just going to work. And there's so many things that we can't think about and we fail to think about in this. So what I really want to talk about here is this is a topic that I've been working on for probably most of my academic career. Economic development incentives. And just out of curiosity, how many of you, if I asked you this question, if I said, how many of you want a government that's business friendly, right? Let's say that you'd want a government that's business friendly, right?
How is that defined?
That is an excellent question, right? Because I'm going to try to dissuade you that you should be business friendly by the time this is all done, right? Because what most, at least elected officials and policymakers think is business friendly is what I want to present here, right? Which is this idea of targeted incentives. So state and local governments, right, finding an industry, finding a firm, and offering them certain tax incentives, right, or tax breaks, targeted incentives. They could be job credits, right, tax abatements, a whole host of things. Direct subsidies in many instances, right? The film industry is notorious for literally just getting cash, right? I mean, really almost directly subsidies, cash, straight to them. And why, right? This is most policymakers' idea of what it means to be business friendly. We're going to support business. We're going to make it easy for them to come here, and they're going to do that one thing that we all say that they're going to do, right, which is create jobs. So just to give you an idea of, again, of what I'm talking about, most of you are probably going to be familiar with most of these. So 2017, right, Amazon announced that they were going to do their second headquarters. 20 different states were competing for that, right? Virginia and New York went out. We all know, most of you probably know what happened with New York, right? They pulled out already. But $573 million is what Virginia is going to end up giving them, is what, at least the best estimates of what the package is, right? Foxconn, right? That's the largest one that we know of, really, and that's already, that they're already reevaluating what they've promised and so forth. That one's sort of coming. There's a whole host of these. Right, the one that's near and dear to my heart is Boeing, of course, right, being right there in near Charleston, South Carolina, right? $900 million to locate there. And I grew up in Michigan, so I'd be a little remiss if I didn't point out the flaws of the automobile industry, right, and the U.S. automobile industry. So these are the types of things that, we're talking about. Millions and billions of dollars given specifically to one firm to locate in one place. Why do they do this? Right? Why do they claim that this is important and it's relevant to do, right? Well, there it is. Create jobs. I tell this to my students all the time, is that when you talk about economic principles, even when you boil it down to something really simple, right? When this is all said and done, hopefully I've given you enough to be dangerous and go out there and tell everybody why targeted incentives are bad. But I'm not going to be able to do it in a 30-second soundbite. And so even if you had a politician who could say, look, these are the reasons why we shouldn't do this, right? It's going to take them 2 to 3 minutes, 5 minutes if they're really good, right, to articulate this viewpoint. And the person, the candidate running against them is going to go, I'm going to create jobs. And they're going to win. So this is what they say, right? It's going to foster innovation, create economic growth. It's going to bring all these things, right? This is the viewpoint of what most policymakers think, right? That these types of public investments are going to be the result of more tax revenue, more jobs, more income, right? Bring that city, that location up. And again, according to Pew Research, this is what most policymakers think is their leading economic tool, offering some sort of targeted incentive. This is what they think they have to offer, and this is why they think they have to offer it. But this is what we have to remember. So this is where that Hayek quote, I think, comes into play. Right? Is that every city, state, country, however we want to, whatever level we want to think about this, has these economic inputs. We've got labor, right? Human capital. We've got resources, natural and capital, right? And they've got to eventually turn into output. Before they do, they work their way through certain institutions. Okay? What some would call, if you will, the rules of the game. The institutions that guide things like property, right? Tax codes. All the things, if you will, that govern how we interact with each other as we use these resources. And eventually, right, then we're going to get economic outcomes, which hopefully are things like jobs created and growth and so forth. And the point is that we've got to get this middle part right. If the rules aren't good, we're not going to get desirable output. We're not going to see those jobs created. We're not going to see the economic growth. Right? My friend Russ Sobel is actually the one who sort of first developed this slide, so I stole this from him, and I'll steal his joke, which is that imagine, if you will, that you're trying to make cakes, right? And so you're mixing up all the batter and you're sticking them in the oven, and the oven's broken. It doesn't matter how many more cakes you put into the oven, you're not going to get yummy baked cakes on the other side. Right? The rules of the game matter. So what are we doing here? What are the rules of the games that we're creating? What are the incentives and so forth that we're doing this? Are we getting the outcomes that the politicians promise us? Right? And this is fascinating to me because, as I said, I've been working in this my whole academic career. And the consistency across academics here, right? It's very hard to find consistency among and consistency among academics and among economists, but on this issue, right? Really consistently, we all pretty much agree. These do not have the desirable outcomes that we think. And yet, this is still the policy tool of choice, right? There's a whole literature out there of economic analysis that is saying that this is wrong, that this isn't doing anything, right? So it doesn't seem to be affecting manufacturing output, right? It's not growing. It's not reducing unemployment, right? I won't go into the data, but I can show you data specifically for South Carolina, where the amount we're spending on incentives is growing by tenfold, and income and unemployment is remaining flat at best. Right? No growth, right? No reduction in there. Right? There's just not a lot of evidence that there's an impact on the local economy, right? And there's not a lot of fact that that targeted industry is doing what we want it to do, either by the number of jobs that they create, right? Or in many instances, right, there's always this idea that we're going to have these spillover effects, right? So we got Boeing, right? This is what we hear in Charleston. We got Boeing, and now we are going to be the leaders in aerospace, right? Engineering and aeronautics, and and all this. All the other manufacturers that go to Boeing are going to want to come to Charleston. 2010, I think was the date up there. It's 2019. I don't know that we've seen one yet, right? But this is the thing that I think is interesting. And this is the point I want to harp on, but this is from a recent study by an economist by the name of Timothy Bartik, and I encourage you to go look up his work. He did an analysis. This is a pretty recent paper. And so what he did is he looked at all the academic papers that are out there that have tried to estimate, right, whether or not economic incentives have had an impact on decision-making and the whole process of moving and so forth. And what he's saying is that between 2 to 25% is his best guess as to the effect of whether or not it changes the mind of the firm to locate there. Which means somewhere between 98 and 75% of the time, it's not having any effect at all as to terms of where they wanted to locate. Boeing wanted to locate in Charleston, South Carolina. Boeing was going to locate in Charleston, South Carolina. It's all gravy. Right? I often argue that what we're doing is really simply moving chess pieces around the board, because if we think about this, what this is promoting, what this whole idea promotes, is if you talk to policymakers, this is what they say. If we didn't offer Boeing the incentives, they would have gone here, and we would have lost all those jobs. So you're now working in a zero-sum game, as opposed to a positive-sum game. Well, last I looked, this is all still the United States. If we look at the macro economy, if they located in Alabama versus South Carolina, would it have changed anything? Right? Who knows? Maybe Alabama would have been actually a better location for them. Maybe there would have been better distribution networks. I don't know. Right? But that's not the decision-making process per se that the politicians are thinking about. So again, I want to try to harp on this idea that what we're doing is not actually changing their minds, right? For all the talk of we're luring them here, right, or we're luring them there, these places, right, these businesses have certain features they're looking for. And there's some things about, if you will, for data servers, right, and centers and so forth, right? Recently, there's been a lot of stuff on this, and what do they want? They want really low electricity prices, right? They want to think about environmental concerns, like are there natural disasters, hurricane and flooding in those areas, right? There's a whole host of things, and if you look down this list of all the things that they want, taxes and incentives are like the last thing they consider in terms of where they want to locate. Right? It's not up at the top. BMW came to South Carolina in the early 90s. And unfortunately, right, BMW has been a great success in the upstate of South Carolina, which means that everybody points to that and says, see, it works. Well, here's the competition. So in the case of BMW, South Carolina offered them $35 million to come locate in Greenville, Spartanburg area. Omaha, Nebraska offered them $250 million. Now here was BMW's criteria, and I may miss some of them, but right, they wanted to be as close in time zone to Bonn, Germany as possible. They wanted a port, they wanted access to good distributions, right, and an airport. Now, there may be a good distribution center, there may be an airport near where they could have located in Omaha, right? But I'm pretty sure no matter that $250 million would have not created a port in the middle of Omaha, right? So, are they going to Omaha, right? It puts them further out on time zone, there's no port, right? But what did South Carolina do? They offered them $150 million. And they came. We won. And they've been amazingly successful. How many of you really doubt that BMW is going to go anywhere and just fail? Right? How often is it that Boeing's going to set up a plant and they're going to go, oh man, this was a disaster. This is going to bankrupt the company. We made the wrong decisions. We did all the wrong analysis. Now maybe for a small firm, right? That we're giving some job tax credits to or something like that. Maybe that's a possibility, right? But we're talking about Fortune 500 companies. They do not need this to survive, but we give it to them. So we can't turn certain situations, right? It doesn't matter how much we give them, it's not what they want. Right? So this is why I think Bartik's figure of, 75 to 98% of the time, we're not changing their mind. They've already decided when they pick their sites, right, this one's going to work for me. And hey, what are you going to give me to come here? So, what is this, right? What's the real problem here? when we do this, we create all kinds of distortions. Tax incentives shift, right? Because what happens, we bring people into the area, which may be generating new tax revenue, but it could be, right, again, this is a lot of times why it doesn't influence the unemployment rate, because a lot of people move into the area to get these so-called jobs that we're creating, right? And so they may not be people that were originally from Charleston, they may not be people that are unemployed. One of the things that we've heard over and over and over again with Boeing is South Carolina's labor was not prepared to go and work in the Boeing plant. They weren't qualified enough. They didn't have enough human capital, right? We needed to educate them better. We needed to do things, and they brought in a lot of talent from elsewhere. Right? These subsidies, right, are going to have to come from somewhere. It's like anything else, right? If we tax somebody, right, the money's first. If we're going to provide a subsidy, we first have to tax individuals. But we got to think about what the opportunity cost of that is. How else could that money have been spent? Right? $900 million, right? $3 billion in the case of Fox, right? But this is clearly the best use of those resources. It's this last part, right? Policymakers just do not have a very good way of evaluating the opportunity cost. It's a counterfactual, right? I've got to be able to say, look, if Boeing doesn't come, if we don't give them anything and they don't come, we're going to be fine. This is going to be our trajectory. And if they do come, right, this is going to be our trajectory, but we don't have to give them anything, right? Chances are they're going to come anyway. That's a hard thing to prove. And it's hard because, right, you've got to convince them that at best you can say, look, there's other ways that you as a state policymaker could have spent that money. You could have fixed the infrastructure in the state, right? You could have put it into perhaps education, right? But more so than that, right, the other thing that they want to talk about is, well, we're going to get a return on this from our general revenue fund. So $1 comes in, we give it to Boeing, and Boeing gives us $6 back in tax revenues. I don't know about you, but I don't remember signing up for the state of South Carolina to be my investment banker. I didn't think of them as making investment decisions for me as to what my return should be on my tax dollars. But this is, again, sort of how they think about it, right? And no one ever says, well, what's the opportunity cost of leaving that money just in the private sector? What could happen if we didn't tax it away from them at all? This is really what I think the issue is. Because once we do this and once we open this up, we get the opportunity of what choice field we call rent seeking, right? Defined here for you, that's using political influence to extract rents, right, for a firm. Special interest group, right? So $900 million is going to come to Boeing as a way of extracting rents out of the state of South Carolina, right? $3 billion for Foxconn out of the state of Wisconsin. And what we're doing here is, again, we're wasting resources because at the end of the day, you put this money into there. So there's someone out there lobbying for this. There's someone else asking for this. Think of all the time and effort and resources they put into getting it. What else could they have been doing? And so rent-seeking kind of begets rent-seeking, and this is what we have going on, right? So what we get is this unnecessary competition. Omaha saying we're going to give BMW $250 million, right? 20 states competing for a second world headquarters for Amazon. Saying we will give you this, that, right? All these different things. And again, we think of this as a beggar thy neighbor approach. We think of this as it's a zero-sum game, right? It creates this environment of, well, if they don't come here, right, they're going to go somewhere else, and we can't have that. We need them to come to South Carolina. We need them to come to Alabama, Texas. Right? And this only, if you will, creates this sort of repeated interaction. So there's a whole host of economic developments that have, there's sort of, I've been trying to figure this out for years. There's sort of quasi-government agencies, right? They're kind of marketing firms and whatnot, and they work with the government to say, hey, Boeing's interested in coming to South Carolina. What can we do for them? Can we talk about how we can put together a package? We'll go out and sell it there for you, right? And, they get a cut for doing that, obviously, but they also, right, these are the people that are promoting this, and it just keeps going on. Right? So, again, what's going on here is the problem is that this is really, really hard to measure. I think we overstate the benefits a lot of times of these firms. The packages are very unclear to begin with, right? So I have no idea there's some data out here, right? Part of the reason that this has been an interesting area to work in for so many years is the data is actually kind of hard to come by. So when you can, you really got to try to find what data sources are out there. A lot of times you got to scrounge for things. And a lot of times the best information out there, sadly, is whatever a journalist wrote in the newspaper about what the package is. Right? That's really the best information that we have as citizens as to what this is. But they'll say things like, well, you know, part of the package is we're going to build you an off-ramp from the interstate, right? And, you know, we're going to spend $10 million to build this off-ramp that's going to come right to your plant. Well, that's one of the benefits we're going to give you. Well, is that really just them? In Greenville, they added a whole other runway to the airport. BMW is not the only one that uses it, right? So is it really $10 million of resources for them? We get overstated benefits all the time. We double count jobs. A firm shuts down in the state and moves to another part of the state, and we give them tax credits for moving from one city to another. There's a great story about a firm in Pennsylvania that did some steel work and so forth. Not necessarily a mill, right, but they did some sort of steel work, and they've been in Latrobe, Pennsylvania forever. They were threatening to leave the state. The governor gave them $1 million to stay, and they moved to Pittsburgh. Right? They stayed within the state, and all those jobs get counted as new jobs because they moved to Pittsburgh in this new spot they've started. Right? Again, we're measuring the wrong thing, I think. Right? Politicians are arguing that the tax revenue is a benefit. I don't see it. Again, I didn't sign up for them to be my investment manager, right? So the idea that they're going to take tax dollars and they're going to get a bigger return to do what with? My roads still suck. My public school system's still in question, right? Where are all these benefits that are supposed to come from this if the tax revenues are just increasing, right? Sixfold, whatever it may be. So why do they do this, right? I study political decision making, and so I take the viewpoint in my area that politicians are just like everybody else. They're rationally self-interested, they weigh out the costs and benefits of their decision making, right? And these people want to keep their jobs. They want to stay in office. If I tell you that I'm going to create 1,000 jobs in the city of Dallas, I'm going to win some votes. People are going to vote for me, right? I'm bringing business here. I'm business friendly. I'm going to make sure that we're growing. And I win the election. It doesn't matter whether or not it's true. Right? A lot of times, though, what we've seen, and this is some of the research I've done recently, the states that are the biggest offenders are ones that are trying to overcome poor fiscal policy and poor tax policy. So they're ones that are in debt, so they're looking for revenues. All right, in the hopes that this is going to generate more income revenue down the road and help them out, because this is going to grow and be this amazing cluster. And you can think about that word and what that means in various ways, but it's going to be there for them. But the ones also with the worst tax policy are the ones, right? Because it's much harder to try to reform tax policy. South Carolina, I have heard politicians tell me this, right? That we know that the tax code is really, really bad. This is why we have to offer them incentives. We should try to reform tax policy, maybe. But it's a lot easier to offer the incentives, right? And the political benefits are much higher than it is to try to reform the policy. So what can we do about this? I don't know. This has been going on for a long, long time. This is not, when I started researching, I found that a lot of this started in the late 19th century. If you want to think about the railroads, some of this was going on with the railroad industry early on in the 19th century, beginning 20th century. But really in the 1930s, it became more sophisticated. The 90s were a boom on this, which is when I was in graduate school, and I saw this as every southern state was trying to get every car manufacturer down into the south, right, from up in the Midwest, and was offering incentives left and right to do so. But what we need to do is something that is going to not be targeted, but create incentives, right, that level the playing field. What we want is good tax policy, not just for Amazon, not just for Boeing, right? Good tax policy that is going to benefit all firms, right? What we want is good education that's going to produce skilled labor that's going to attract businesses to that area, right? We want to have good infrastructure, right? These are the things that we should be doing if we make ourselves, right, attractive in those regards. Businesses, I think, will come, right, and compete on those margins and not the one firm at a time. How do you do that? I really honestly don't know, but I think some states have to either be brave, right? You've got to have an actual champion that's going to try and do this and say, we're not going to do it. I haven't seen anybody do that yet. I do like the idea of trying to create some sort of an agreement, though, right? Maybe states could come together and they could realize that we shouldn't do this. And if they could come together, or even just a group within a region, right? We're not going to do this. Let's come to an agreement. We're not going to do this. And we're going to try to do this in a better way. Maybe this is an approach that could be taken. I don't know how likely that is. I don't think it's very likely. All right. So what else can we do? Well, we need better cost-benefit analysis. Right now, it's all benefit and no cost, I would argue, right, when they do the analysis. These are all the things that are going to come, right? This is all the benefits we're going to get. Yeah, it's going to cost us this, but this is just, the analysis is not very transparent at all. And so even transparency, right? So better accounting of the costs, and then transparency to the citizens. What did we actually spend? What did we actually promise them? Would go a long way, I think, in helping to do this, right? Because I would like to think that citizens would start to go, wait a minute, they don't pay property tax for the next 20 years? How is it that we're supposed to have better school systems if there's no property tax coming in from this major commercial real estate endeavor? So that's where we are. I appreciate y'all's time, and do we have some time for
absolutely
Q&A? All right.
Yep. So Colorado, I believe they have policies in place that actually limit handouts to business. I remember I worked with the county government authority there, and they had some restrictions, constitutional restrictions, I believe.
Various states do have different types of rules, and so it's all it all depends upon the state as to what types of things they can do, right? And some of them do have some limits in their constitution. Some of them do have limits in statutes, even, right, as to what they can do. But I find that it all depends on sort of who's in power at that moment as to how creative they can be about getting around that statute. So they may not be able to offer them this, so they turn around and offer them that. If you're not familiar with the term, right, way of thinking about this is that, politicians are entrepreneurs as well, right? So they work their way around regulations and they can be creative about doing this. So you hope that those types of things help, but it all depends on how they're written and what it is that they're limited on as to what they can do. And it depends, again, on who's in power and how much they're going to actually enforce this. We were up in Indianapolis a couple years ago, and one of the people that we met with at one time was head of the Department of Commerce for the state of Indiana and worked under Governor Mitch Daniels. And what their check was that they wanted to give as little as they possibly could. And a calculation that I think could be made that is reasonable, and I want to show you a slide on this, is how many jobs did they say they're going to create and how much money did we give them? Now, just do a simple back-of-the-envelope calculation. How much are we paying for each job? And how much are these people going to actually make? So I wrote a paper, one of the papers I wrote recently, right, I looked at sort of doing literature review and gave an example of a FedEx plant in distribution center in North Carolina. And if you worked it out, it was something like $76,000 per job. And the average FedEx worker in that plant was going to make $35,000. So we pay twice as much as what they're going to make to have those jobs. Does that sound like a sound decision making, right? And the numbers go up from there. I mean, you know, the automobile industry is one of my favorites. They've got hundreds of thousands of dollars, right, per job, right? And so that was one of the metrics that they used. And if that looked unreasonable, they said no. And he told me, I thought it was interesting, and again, this is what it takes some courage, right? He said they sat across somebody and they said, look, we already know you're coming. We already know you've made this decision, so we're not giving you anything. You can say you're not coming. We know better. We're calling your bluff. And they gave him nothing, and they came. There are some stories like that. One more, if you don't mind. Southwest, right, came to Charleston, and several years ago, and everybody kept saying the only way we are going to get a discount airline to come to Charleston is if we offer them incentives. And they wanted them, Southwest wanted to come to Charleston. They wanted them to go up to Columbia. I don't know how many have ever been to Columbia, South Carolina. Nobody wants to go to Columbia, South Carolina. It makes no sense to have, even as disparate as Southwest's patterns are, right? Nobody wants to go to Columbia, South Carolina. And they didn't want to go there. And while they were debating and whether or not we should add this tax and can we do it in the legislature, right, and so forth, and they failed to get it through, and guess what? Southwest came. But I got all kinds of quotes I can tell you from politicians that are saying, if we don't do this, they're not coming. They made a decision based on what was economically sound. Now, they never went to Columbia, right, which is what they were trying to get them to do, right, because Southwest made smart businesses, and they didn't make it based on the economic incentives. And they're still there, right, and doing well and adding locations all the time.
What are your comments about right to work laws? And then kind of related to that, what are your thoughts about potentially subsidizing worker training?
Subsidizing worker training? I think it depends. I mean, I don't know that I'm, it's a weird thing because I don't know that I want a policy that specifically subsidizes, you know, employees for a particular firm on, say, particular tasks and something like that, right? I don't think that makes sense. However, I do think it could make sense, right? Not to give a subsidy to the firm, but to say, you know, you need people who are going to need to learn X, right? And they need these handful of skills. And so maybe we need to have a program at the two-year schools that would help develop, right, that skill set. And so we already publicly fund many of the two-year institutions, right? So let's build a program that makes sense, that people can come through, and when they come out, they're going to be trained for you. And that's been done some, right? And I think in that sense, I think that sort of makes sense, right? We're already subsidizing those institutions. So let's get the right skill sets and the right programs out there that could then train and build that human capital in a way that makes sense. But we've also done it, I've seen it in other places where you know, they go into, say, the two-year college. They bring their own people. They use their facilities. The state pays for it, and they just come in and use it as a training session for their employees. You know, whoever's coming in at that wave, and then they, you know, and then they get them going or whatnot. I don't know that that makes sense, right?
Then the second question was, what value is the right to work laws?
The right to work laws? I think the right to work laws are really actually pretty important here, right? That was on the list for BMW, and it was on the list for Boeing, right? People want and like a right to work states, right? This is a large part of why, right? You get so many automobile manufacturers, both domestic and foreign, moving from the Midwest, right, down to the southern states. I grew up in Michigan, right? And the union is I never thought in my lifetime I'd ever see Michigan become a right to work state. Pretty amazing in my mind. The union mentality there is incredibly strong, even for people that have no part of the union, right? Because everybody has somebody probably connected to the automobile industry, and somewhere along the line, those people then have to be, or at least they had to be in the union. So incredibly strong union mentality. And, you know, companies want to try to be able to get away from that, to be able to have options. They tried, I think, at least 3 times to unionize the employees over at Boeing. And they have every right to try to. The employees don't want to do it. I think they may have been. I mean, I know a lot of them have tried. You know, they keep going in. I don't. I do know, though, that, you know, you've got to allow them to come in, right, and do this. And I just know mostly in South Carolina, primarily just because you literally hear the ads on the radio about how, you know, we love being here, but, you know, the company doesn't want you to be unionized. They're taking advantage of you, you know, and you need to check yes on this card. And, you know, I mean, whole campaigns that are just trying to get them to become unionized. And you have to let them come in, and that's fine. And again, you can have a union even in a right-to-work state, but they haven't wanted it. But it is, I think, a critical issue. It's often on those states' lists.
What about a situation like California, where they had Proposition 13 that massively cut the property taxes for everybody and for every business? Has that ever been studied?
It has. I've not done work on that, right? But I know that there are studies out there on that topic, right? South Carolina, not as extreme, but they did something like this where they passed they shifted a lot of the burden from residential to commercial, and then said, okay, we'll sort of cap residential tax values to a degree. And it just shifted the burden. And so this is the issue, right, is that
in California, the businesses had their taxes cut too.
Yeah.
So they actually had that much less money, but there would be more money in the pockets of the business owners and the residents of the state. And I would think that should be studied.
Well, again, this is what I would like, right, is that the policy, whatever the tax policy is, if we're going to lower property tax, let's lower property tax, right, for everyone. That's what's going to be appealing, right, as opposed to saying, you know, you still have to pay 4%, but, you know, if we bring in Will's firm, we can negotiate. You know, Will's going to pay only, you know, 1% over the next 20 years. And it's great that he came. It's great that his firm's there, right? But what tax revenues then are coming out that are used to then fund these things, right? So we massively undercut those types of things. Could we lower property taxes? Maybe, but if we're going to do that, then let's do it for everybody, right? So we want to have this level playing field as opposed to saying this person pays 1%, this person pays 2%, right? This person, you know, and all the rest of these people over here who have been here forever and started their businesses and got nothing, right, pay the 6% that all the other commercial people pay.
Well, in Dallas in the 90s, it got so bad with tax abatements that there was literally hundreds of millions of dollars. So they couldn't even pave and repair all the streets because the money wasn't there.
Economic index is so hot right now, 19.
Yeah,
Super hot. Have you, and I know you said information is very difficult to pull up. Have you done research on the states that give away the least versus the most and looked at any downstream effects on it?
Sort of, because it's hard to tell, right, who's giving away the most, because this is stuff that's not done. The way the data is reported and the way that it comes in, it's not, you know, annually this firm is doing this and this state is doing this, right? So you could have a couple of years where maybe a firm, right, or a state doesn't attract anyone, and then, you know, year 5, if you will, then, right, they give this massive deal to, say, Mercedes. And, you know, and then the next year, right, maybe they do another firm. So the data is kind of inconsistently reported. So, you know, if you look over these 10 years, what did they do? Well, they gave one incentive package, but it was as large as all, you know, this one state that maybe did give pretty consistently, right? So it's hard to tell who's giving a lot, who's giving a little over time because of that. there's an economist at Georgia State University by the name of Carly Ann Patrick that has created an index that tries to look at the laws. So what Dan was mentioning, right? What are the statutory and constitutional restrictions that exist, and try to score that to see whether or not your state is more likely or less likely to be able to give away. And she's done some research on that, right? And so the way that she puts it is, you can't exactly like say what the numbers are in terms of, this is good, this is bad, but she says this is either, you can think about it as the extreme is it's no way, and at the other end, it's all you need is a handshake and we can give you whatever you want, right? So she has some of that, and she has shown that, large investments don't necessarily, it doesn't matter that it's a large investment, it doesn't necessarily see this downstream and so forth. And you can see that the ones that obviously have more permissiveness tend to give more away. But again, one of the things we found recently is the states that give away the most are the ones that just have bad tax policy to begin with, right? They're using this as a means of sort of compensating for bad tax policy.